thank you for joining me for another ballistics comparison video. Today I am comparing the 6.5 Creedmoor to the 7mm 08. I am continuing my 7mm 08 comparison videos up through a few more selected calibers that has been requested of me, and so I'll finish those, and then I plan on doing many other calibers. Probably the first one I'll do outside of the 7mm 08 is the 7mm Remington Magnum versus the 300 Winchester Magnum. There's a request for that one already, and then there's a whole lot more out there that I would like to do. There's plenty of 30-06 comparisons that I plan on doing as well. So anyway, let's get started with this. There was no recoil data for the Creedmoor as far as the pounds of recoil and the velocity. So I went up and I looked at the 260 Remington, which is very similar to the Creedmoor as far as energy goes. It's actually slightly more powerful, and so it has a little bit more kick, I'm assuming, but it's going to be pretty close. What I've gathered is the Creedmoor will probably be pretty similar to the 7mm 08 as far as recoil is concerned, and I wouldn't pick one over the other based on recoil. They're going to be fairly similar. I'm guessing it's going to be about the same, 12 pounds of recoil for that caliber for the Creedmoor. So anyway, we'll go ahead and skip ahead. We're going to go to the factory ammunition that is available for these guns. I didn't put as many on here as is available, but I put on a good amount to try and get a fair comparison here between the two. Let's go ahead and start out with the Hornady 150 grain, or the Hornady ELDX bullets. Both of these came out at the same time, the 150 grain for the 7mm 08 and the 143 grain for the 6.5 Creedmoor. So the 150 grain for the 7mm 08 has 1,381 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards and is going 2,037 feet per second. The 143 grain ELDX for the 6.5 Creedmoor is also going 2,037 feet per second, and it has 1,309 foot-pounds of energy, and it's also dropped in 43 inches. I think that is not accurate. I might have forgotten to change. I copied this guy from up here. The energy is accurate. We can go check that right now on Hornady's website. Okay, so yeah, I copied this line from up here and input the energy, but I did not put in the FPS and the drop, but it's fairly similar. If we go over here and look, this is a 6.5 Creedmoor 143 grain ELDX. The drop is, or the FPS is 2031 instead of 2037. The drop is 44.4 instead of 43. So they are very similar as far as speed and drop. However, because the 7mm 08 has a little bit bigger bullet, it has a little bit more energy. So 1,381 foot-pounds of energy. The 143 grain ELDX bullet actually has a higher ballistic coefficient of 611, I believe. No, 620 should be on here. 623, yeah. And so, the 150 grain ELDX has a ballistic coefficient of 575. So a little bit higher. That's why this one, it's going slower at the beginning, but it starts to get closer the farther out they go because of the slightly higher ballistic coefficient. Alright, it looks like Hornady is one of the only manufacturers that is providing very many options for the Creedmoor from the factory. There are other options out there, but Federal doesn't have anything, and Nosler has just a few down here, but nothing like what Hornady has. Hornady is definitely leading the pack with factory ammunition for the Creedmoor. So for the next one, for the Creedmoor, we have the 147 grain ELD. The ELD is just a match bullet. It's not for hunting, but it's pretty impressive numbers here. It has 670, I think, ballistic coefficient. Let's take a look here. So yeah, it has a coefficient of 697, which is very high. 697 ballistic coefficient, so very high. I wish this was a hunting round, and I wouldn't be surprised if they make one eventually, but right now it's just for match. However, you look at the ballistics, it's pretty awesome. 2092, 1,428 foot-pounds of energy, drops 43 inches, and so that's beats the 7mm 08 in energy, and it's going faster, same drop. it's pretty impressive because it has the higher ballistic coefficiency that it's able to pull ahead in the energy department than the 150 grain ELDX is able to do. Alright, so let's compare some of the other factory loads that are available from Hornady. The 139 grain SST for the 7mm-08 has 1,308 foot-pounds of energy, and it drops 39.6 inches. This is pretty flat round right there. It's cruising 2,900 FPS, I think, on that guy. Down here, the SST down here is 129 grains, so 20 grains less. It's 2,059 feet per second. 1,214 foot-pounds of energy, 39.7 inch drops. Extremely close, 39.6, 39.7, 2059, so it's moving the exact same. Just has a little bit less energy down here, about just under 100 pounds less. Oh, so this was interesting for the Creedmoor, the 150 grain boat tail hollow point American gunner. Uses self-defense, target shooting varmint, and small game. This is unique to this one. They don't have very many of the American Gunners versions of their ammo. They do for their handguns, but not for the rifles. So it's kind of neat seeing this in the rifle. But it is, primarily for self-defense, and then you can use it for these other things as well. But so the ballistics on that's 1972 feet per second at 500 yards, 1,209 foot-pounds of energy. So fairly similar to the SST. 100 pounds less than the ELDX. It's similar there. So our next, go down to the 120 grain. It has 1,150 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards. You go up to the GMX up here, has 1,267 foot-pounds of energy. It is again 29 grains heavier. This one drops less because it's a little bit lighter and moving faster. It drops 4 inches less. So yeah, and then the Interlock American Whitetail I didn't include for the 7mm-08, but I know it's available because I purchased it for it. But 1,015 drops 45 inches, and then down here we have the Nosler Trophy Grade Long Range 129 grain. It is 1,243 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards. So that's better than your SST, not quite as good as your ELDX. And then the Ballistics tip, they have 140 grain for this guy. It is 1,065 foot-pounds of energy, 1,851. Almost exactly 100 pounds less than this guy and traveling 80 feet per second less. The drop is actually pretty significant as well, 60-inch drop versus 53. So as you can see, the 7mm-08 just has slightly higher energy kind of across the board than the Creedmoor, except for this guy right here. This is kind of a awesome little bullet that Hornady's released for the Creedmoor. Let's move on down to hand loads. For the ELDX, for the 6.5, you get a little bit better for hand loading. So this is the max load data here. You get 1,331 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards, 20,000 or 2,017 feet per second. So it's about 22 inches or 22 foot-pounds of energy more. But this is a max load right here. So if it were me and I was going to use this off of the Hornady loading data, I'd probably just go pick up a box of this, unless you're just looking to save money. If you already have reloading supplies and this is the bullet you're set on using, I would just go, I would reload it if you already have the supplies. If you don't, I would go pick up a box from the factory. Down here, there's a few more options for the 7mm-08, the 150 grain. If you hand load it, 46 grains of the H414 powder, 1,421 foot-pounds of energy, so about 40 more there, 65 feet per second there. And then the 162 grain, which they have available, the ELDX, this is my, that's the bullet I used last year for hunting elk. 1,482 foot-pounds of energy, 30 feet per second. And that's just off the factory data. I actually got much higher. When I put in 46 grains, I got much different results, but I'm also seeing it higher or longer than what they were. So mine, this is what I was hitting with mine according to my chronograph. 2,815 FPS is what I was getting. 1,631 foot-pounds of energy, 48.9 inch drop. And that's why I chose to use that, because it's pretty impressive for the 7mm-08 to be carrying 1,631 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards. So there's another bullet that I might switch to, and that's the 150 grain Nosler AccuBond long range, and it has a higher ballistic coefficient than this guy right here, slightly lower than this, but I can push it up to almost 2,900 feet per second probably in some hand loads, so I'm going to give that a test this year. That should be a fun one. Alright, let's move down here to some more hand loads here. Nosler, this is taken from the Nosler load data for the 6.5 Creedmoor. We have the 100 grain partition at 500 yards, 771 foot-pounds of energy on the most accurate load. The max load is 817 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards. I included the 200 yards here so you can see them as well. 1,514 foot-pounds of energy, so definitely a good amount there, and 1,593, so not a huge gain. I would stick to the most accurate here in that configuration. 125 grain partition for the Creedmoor, 1,060 foot-pounds of energy, so almost 300 foot-pounds more than the 100 grain on the most accurate, and then 1,730, so over 200 at 200 yards. So this one is definitely a good combination here. Max loads 44.5 grains of the RL17 gives you 1,148 foot-pounds of energy, so 90 or 88 more, and then 1,859 at 200 yards, so 129 more. But decent bullet right here. We do have some better ones. The AccuBond performs like the partition does in terminal performance, but it is the updated AccuBond process that bonds it together and makes it a little bit higher, gives it a little bit higher ballistic coefficient. So these two bullets right here essentially perform very similar once they hit the target, but flying through the air. This AccuBond is going to be more efficient, as you can see by the numbers here. For the 500 yards, it has 1,095 foot-pounds of energy, and then with the higher load, it has a little bit more. It's interesting. So it's a longer bullet, 43.5 grains of RL17. It's moving 1,230 feet per second at 500 yards and 1,915 at 200 yards. Based on the 500 yard performance, you can see it gives it another 80 foot-pounds of energy more, roughly. Let's go down here. The long range AccuBonds, those have the highest ballistic coefficient. They're pretty awesome bullets. And you look at this one right here, it's 1 grain less than the AccuBond up here, but it has 1,214 foot-pounds of energy using the same load data. Nosler has the same load data for these three, for this bullet. And you look at the max load data here, 43.5 grains of RL17. It's 1,359 foot-pounds of energy. So this little bullet packs a good punch right there. Almost 2,000 foot-pounds at 200 yards. So I would say this is sufficient for elk, more than sufficient for the majority of deer out to 500 yards. Elk, 500 yards would probably be the max I'd go. I'd probably stay a little bit closer than that, but I'm sure with the proper shot placement, you could take an elk beyond 500 yards with that bullet right there. Down here, moving on to the 140 grains. Again, the ballistic coefficient is pretty low for these Nosler, the older Nosler partitions. They perform extremely well. Once they hit the target, they're just not as efficient in the air. This is also a very light load, actually. 33.5 grains is not very much. Here we have 910 foot-pounds of energy, 1,462. Compare that to this guy right above here, and you're much better off using this guy. You're 300 foot-pounds more both ways. And same thing down here. 200 there, and 200, just over 200 there. So I would take this guy here over this guy any day. Down here, the 140 grain AccuBond. Again, this doesn't have the ballistic coefficient of the long range. The long range is their newest ones. This guy down here is pretty awesome, so we'll get to that guy in a second. But 938 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards, 1,140 on the max loads, using 41 grains of IMR 4350. This is probably wouldn't be my first choice. I'd use either this guy or this guy. This guy right here. This is this is very low. This is the same load data right here, and it's not very much. This is the lowest recipe I think they have for the 140 grain bullets for Nosler. This is the highest, so you can see there's a big jump here. But this one, 142 grain, has 1,440 foot-pounds at 500 yards using 41 grains of the IMR 4350, which is pretty good powder. I've had some really good luck with that in my 30-06 and my 7mm-08. But yeah, so 1,440 foot-pounds there. So this would be a good one. I probably wouldn't, if you're going to use the lowest one, this would have very little recoil, but it's just a pretty low, pretty conservative load. I would probably go with this guy down here if you're going to do that. Anyway, let's move on to the 7mm-08. 140 grains, the smallest partition available in the 7mm-08, and it starts out at 1,205 foot-pounds of energy. At 200 yards, 1,991 foot-pounds of energy. So that right there is higher than the best of the Creedmoors. That's where we start out with. Let's go up from there. The AccuBond, this is the new version of the partition. 1,321 foot-pounds of energy at 500 yards, 2,058 foot-pounds of energy at 200 yards. This is the most accurate and the max load. That's why these are together right there. It is one and the same on the Nosler load data. So that's a pretty good combination right there. 150 grain partition. This one, again, older bullet design, less ballistic coefficiency. 1,135 foot-pounds, 1,255 foot-pounds at the max, and then at 200 yards on the most accurate, you're 1862 and 2037 there. This is the one I was talking about that I might switch to. This is an Nosler AccuBond long range. It has a 611 BC, which is pretty awesome for a 150 grain bullet. It's 1,409 foot-pounds on the most accurate and 1,553 foot-pounds on the max. On the most accurate, 200 yards, you're 214. On the max, you're 2,201 foot-pounds. So easily, very good load for elk right there. I would use that for elk or long-range deer. 160 grain partition, again, the ballistic coefficiency does drop, but we still hit over 2,000 there at 200 yards. 1774 there, 1,095, 1,290. So it does drop there, but we do have the AccuBond, which is an updated version of that. 1,193 foot-pounds and 1,403. So that's the max load there. Still not as good as this 150 grain up there, but pretty decent. And then we have two more down here, the 175 grain Nosler partition, 1159. This is traveling pretty slow, 1727 feet per second. Go up to the max, 1,321 foot-pounds of energy, 1,844. That's a really big bullet. If I was going to use something that big, I would definitely use the Nosler AccuBond, and that's 1,376 on the most accurate, which it's pretty slow. It's only going 2,475 feet per second out of the barrel, I think. So a pretty slow-moving bullet there. And then down here, this was going 1,563 foot-pounds there, 2,173. But again, I would go down and drop 25 grains off. Go with this guy right here because he's going to beat out this Nosler partition down there. Alrighty, so there's a couple of bullets here. Now to sum it up here, I did some averages. I haven't done this on any of the other videos, but I took an average calculator and went through and added up all the results for 500 yards for the most accurate and the max loads. Here is the results. The 6.5 Creedmoor most accurate load energy average was 1,025 at 500 yards. And then the max load energy average for the 6.5 Creedmoor was 1,177 foot-pounds. The 7MM-08 most accurate load energy average was 1,236, so you're looking an average of 211 foot-pounds more on average for the most accurate loads than the 6.5 Creedmoor at 500 yards. And then the max load is 1,386, 209 foot-pounds average more. So the 7mm-08 averages about 200 foot-pounds of energy more than the Creedmoor. And then down here, same thing. This is just out to 200 yards. The 6.5 Creedmoor averages 618 foot-pounds of energy at 200 yards, which is pretty great. And that's at the most accurate. 1831 max energy, going off the max load data. So you'll be anywhere in between those two right there, depending on what loads you choose. And then up here again for the 7MM-08, we have 1909, so that's almost 300 foot-pounds more for the most accurate at 200 yards. And then 2085, which is 250 foot-pounds more than the Creedmoor. So as you can see, as you get farther out, the differences diminish slightly, but the 7mm-08 does hold about a 200 foot-pounds energy lead out to 500 yards. So there you have it. That's the 6.5 Creedmoor versus the 7mm-08. Let me know if you have any questions. Go ahead and comment below. And if you have any requests for any comparisons you want me to do, let me know, and I will try and get those for you. But thanks for tuning in, and I'll post another video next week, same time. Try to do one every Tuesday night or Wednesday. So please subscribe, and we'll see you next week.